This is my review of Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan. Okay, so this episode is actually a little bit interesting in that it's a story that Rohan tells about a mysterious village he researches in order to do a one-shot for one of his mangas. So it's kind of an interesting story, but it's also a true story about a time he went to a mysterious millionaire's village and the interesting experience he had there. So it starts with Rohan doing his warm-ups that we saw at the end of Diamond is Unbreakable, where and in this episode, in this OVA, he actually gives a bit more of an in-depth explanation as to how he does his warm-ups. He bends his wrists at 90 degrees, and then also while maintaining 90 degrees, he then proceeds to count to close each individual finger and then open them back up in this particular order, starting with the thumbs, ending with the pinkies, and then going back. And then that's how he's ready to draw his manga. And it's not really a major world building thing, but it's just a little habit of Rohan that kind of was brought up at the end of Diamond is Unbreakable, but was explained in further detail here, and that's just a continuation of the thing that was there. But in any case, after that scene, he actually meets with Kyoka Izumi, who is an editor at Shonen Jump, and a different editor. He apparently has multiple editors, or she was his then editor at the time that this OVA was written. But in any case, she approaches Rohan and asks him about his latest one shot, about what he's planning to write, and asks him if he had at least put some thought into what he wants to write for his one shot. And Rohan points out that he has been mulling it over and thinks that a solar eclipse would actually be interesting to write about. And while Kyoka doesn't really deny that that's actually a good topic, she instead decides to ask him about a different topic, about a secret mysterious village. And Rohan is a little bit confused as to what she's talking about until she explains it all to him. As she explains, there is indeed a secret village secluded in the wilderness that can only be approached by foot or by helipad, and it's impossible to get there otherwise. Because as she explains, it's actually disconnected from the roads, so the only way they get there is by foot or by helipad. And it also doesn't seem to be connected to an electrical grid yet, for whatever reason, has running electricity. And also, more to her point, and why she thinks Rohan would be interested, is that there's actually a house there for sale that she intends to move into. And Rohan is a little bit confused as to what's going on, pointing out that he literally just declared for bankruptcy not too long ago, and he's kind of flat broke because of that. At which point she points out that he's not actually going to be paying for the house, but she is. She's the one who's going to live there, and then she proceeds to explain that everyone there was around 20. That everyone who moved there was around 25, but shortly before gaining their fortunes and becoming successful multimillionaires. And she points out that since she's 25 and noticed that is likely the magic number, that it would be a good idea for her to move there and possibly gain good fortune by living there. And Rohan once again points out confusion, pointing out that he's not entirely sure how that helps him. Since it's clear that she just wants to write a story about herself, but she merely points out that he just wants to be accompanied so that she can actually go there and he can accompany her and maybe get some more information about the village for his one shot. So at which point Rohan finally relents, but points out that again they don't really have a helipad. They don't really have a helipad, and the only other way is by foot. So they decide to go through for a hike while the piano track from part 4 actually plays in the background. And they actually go on a quest to get to the gate of the village. But they do eventually arrive. At which point Kyoka decides to point out a very important rule going forward, which is that the village doesn't take kindly to poor manners. And as we've firmly established throughout part 4 and also the OVAs, Rohan's a good guy, but he doesn't necessarily have the best manners. He's a very matter-of-fact person, and is kind of a bit full of himself sometimes. So as a test, Kyoka asks him when the best time to actually take off their jacket is before entering a house. And Rohan eventually ultimately admits that she's wasting his time and points out that that obviously the best time to actually take off their jackets is before they get into the house, so that none of the dust winds up inside the house if there is any dust on their jacket. And Kyoka is proud of Rohan, pointing out that he passed with flying colors and that he really does have some good manners. At which point they hear a baby bird crying and go to investigate, and as it turns out, the baby bird fell out of its nest. And they don't really have any, and they don't really know where its nest is, and they're kind of short on time because they have to go meet with the realtor inside the village. They decide the next best thing would be to put it inside a little candy box that Kyoka had saved from their meeting at the cafe, and proceeds to fill it with leaves and then scoop the bird up in it so that the bird can just sit in there as a makeshift nest until they can find its mother. At which point the person responsible for escorting them through the village, whose name he eventually reveals to be Ikkyu after they exchange greetings, it tells them that they're ready for them and that he'll be escorting them through the mansion and that he's going to be the one who's going to ultimately fetch them until they actually meet with the realtor. At which point they proceed to go through the main area of the village into the guest house. And throughout this entire sequence of them being brought to the waiting room, the two of them are very particular to actually make sure that their manners are prim and proper. Case in point, one of the first things they do after taking off their jacket, they take off their jacket outside the village, and then Ikkyu takes them. Then they make sure that their shoes are nice and tight to the steps, so that they can easily slip them back on when they get ready to leave. And then finally, they're brought to the waiting room where Ikkyu tells them that they're going to be there to wait until they can actually go out, until the realtor is ready to meet with them, and points out that he's going to go fetch the realtor now, so they should really wait. But before he leaves properly, he brings them some tea and pours it for them, and then he leaves and goes to go fetch the realtor. At which point, Rohan quickly realizes that the test that they're supposed to be taking for their good etiquette has likely already begun, and that likely the best way to actually proceed with this is to actually drink tea the proper way. At which point, and sure enough, Rohan asks Kyoka if she actually knows the proper way to drink tea, and she admits that she does, and that she doesn't need to be nervous because she knows that the best way to drink tea is calmly and carefully, and to not make a mess. At which point she goes to take a drink of her tea, but before she can, Ikkyu barges back into the room and tells them both that they need to leave because they broke the rules of etiquette. At which point Kyoka understandably voices her confusion since she doesn't feel like she broke any rules. At which point Ikkyu responds that she actually broke 3. At which point he then proceeds to explain in detail each rule that she broke, namely that when you enter a guest room, you're supposed to sit at the seats closest to the door instead of the seats of honor, which is what Rohan and Kyoka did. Second, that they're not supposed to step on the edges of a tatami mat inside a Japanese room, which again, the room is a very Japanese style room, so they did that. And finally, while Kyoka was right at taking the tea from the saucer and holding it that way, she put her fingers through the cup, which is a sign of bad manners. So for that reason, Ikkyu asks them both to leave, and that they're not going to sell a house to somebody with such improper manners. At which point Kyoka begs Ikkyu to give her a second chance, pointing out that she would be more than willing to take the test again if it means that she can prove that she's worthy of living there. And Ikkyu decides to relent and decides to go fetch his master and tells them to give her a second chance, and then he leaves. When Rohan points out that this seems to be a little bit pointless since this place is clearly very weird, and pointing out that there's something very strange going on in the village. She merely points out that the reason she wants to stay is because A, it's a very beautiful, and B, she feels like she deserves her chance at happiness, and that this village is actually the best chance for her. But as she's explained that, Rohan notices that, reaches into his pocket and notices that there's blood coming off on his fingers. and then proceeds to reach in his pocket to figure out where the source of the blood is coming from. And also at the same exact time, Kyoka gets a call on her phone. At which point we find out that A, the baby bird they had saved had died inside the box inexplicably without warning and is now bleeding out. And B, both Kyoka's mother and boyfriend were in a car wreck, and both of them were killed instantaneously. So, at which point Rohan quickly realizes that something is afoot, and sure enough, when EQ comes back and remarks that they can actually take the test again, Rohan decides to confront him and uses Heaven's Door to actually figure out what exactly is going on with the village that caused Kyoka to actually lose her loved ones. At which point Rohan proceeds to read through EQ's memories with Heaven's Door and discovers that the village is actually placed under a curse where proper manners are rewarded and improper manners are punished accordingly. Case in point, Kyoka, when she came in, she broke 3 rules of proper etiquette and lost 3 loved ones as a result. So it's literally you do well, you get rewarded. You do poorly, you lose a loved one. That's the kind of game we're playing. At which point Rohan realizes that he needs to actually figure out more about what exactly is going on. Pointing out and after doing some more reading, realizes that it's actually controlled by the gods of the mountain, who are the true masters of the village. And Rohan realizes that by breaking the taboo, they most likely have angered the gods. But after doing even more reading, he realizes too late that he himself has actually broken a rule of etiquette. Since, as it turns out, EQ is one of the few people who can actually remain conscious while Heaven's Door is active. And it's revealed that because Rohan used Heaven's Door to read EQ's memories without his permission, that was another breach of etiquette. And case in point, Kyoka then proceeds to collapse from a heart attack. At which point EQ revives himself, pointing out that Rohan had broken a breach of etiquette and that Kyoka would be punished as a result. And Rohan points out that she had nothing to do with it, and that she shouldn't be punished for something he did. But EQ merely responds that sorrow and sympathy don't really matter when it comes to proper etiquette. But asks Rohan that if he wishes to save her, he merely has to take the test again. At which point Rohan responds that of course he's going to take the test because he's not going to leave Kyoka there to die. At which point EQ brings out a corn on the cob, and asks Rohan the proper way to eat it. And Rohan initially seems like he's going to break the rules again, and picks up a knife and fork to actually eat the corn on the cob, which in addition to that, EQ also provided a pair of chopsticks. But Rohan eventually realizes that it's a trick and tells EQ that he shouldn't underestimate Rohan Kishibe. At which point he picks up the corn with his bare hands and proceeds to eat it properly. So and then also tells EQ that at any point he's welcome to look down. At which point EQ realizes that he's actually been stepping on the edge of a tatami mat, and Rohan explains that he actually put a subliminal code using Heaven's Door into EQ's mind to actually trick EQ into stepping on tatami mats, so that he in turn breaks several rules of etiquette without realizing it and without being able to actually help himself. And obviously EQ was a little upset that he was tricked, pointing out that Rohan will face the wrath of the gods for doing such a thing. But Rohan merely points out that the only person who's really going to incur the wrath of the gods is EQ himself, and then tells EQ that if he'll undo the command if he revives all of Kyoka's loved ones, which EQ is forced to oblige. At which point EQ, in a last-ditch attempt to try and pull one over on Rohan again, asks him if he would like to take the test, but Rohan merely refuses and leaves before anything bad can happen to him and Kyoka anymore. At which point it's revealed that this entire time he was telling the story to Koichi, Okuyasu, and Josuke. Again, Josuke makes a cameo in the episode, but we don't actually see his face because he's not important to this story. And as it turns out, because Rohan was able to actually visit that village, he did indeed wind up writing a successful one-shot from it. And Koichi points out that that's actually a pretty impressive story, and that he's amazed that they got out in one piece, and also asks what happened to Kyoka's loved ones, and Rohan merely responds that A, the baby bird actually survived and they were actually able to return it to its nest, and B, as it turns out, the death of both her mother and boyfriend were actually undone, and as it turns out, it was merely changed so that it was a false alarm. So, in short, Kyoka didn't lose any of her loved ones, and they ultimately wound up surviving because of that. It's at this point where Rohan decides to tell Koichi that he's actually going to be leaving for a while to actually do some research, and that he'll be back around 8. And while Koichi understands that Rohan does this and will likely be out, Okuyasu points out that he actually needs to stop being a freeloader and actually needs to look into a new place to actually move in and find a new place to live. And Rohan does point out and agree with the Okuyasu that he does need to find a place where he can move back into some place and actually have a proper workstation at long last. At which point Okuyasu actually offers Rohan a place at his house, pointing out that it's just him and his dad, and they really have a massive mansion to live in. So Rohan would be more than able to find a place where he can actually sit down and write his stuff. And Rohan does decide to take Okuyasu up on his offer, pointing out that Okuyasu's dad is actually an interest of him, and that he would like to actually research Okuyasu's dad and figure out what he is. And Okuyasu is ecstatic by that, pointing out that maybe he could use Heaven's Sword to actually save his dad, but Rohan merely points out that might not be possible. So in any case, yeah, it just ends with Rohan moving in with Okuyasu. But more to the point, it implies that this village actually does exist out on the mountain somewhere near Morio. And apparently there's just this supernatural group. There's just this supernatural gods of the mountain, as they were, who threaten to take everything from people who breach their very specific rules of etiquette. And if somebody isn't well behaved and well mannered, they will likely suffer the wrath of the gods of the mountain as long as they're inside the village. So yeah, it's very interesting that that's actually a thing. Because this OVA overall have just expanded the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure by explaining that there are indeed some weird things that can happen, namely that angry gods can sometimes show up and get pissed off if you don't show proper etiquette. But in any case, that's my review of Touchbook Kishibe Rohan. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. And also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support the show. Be sure to go check that out. It's only a couple bucks a month, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I'm always saying thanks. So go ahead and do that. Also, be sure to check out my Twitch. I stream regularly over there, 2:30 Eastern Standard Time every Sunday. So I haven't streamed recently because of holidays and of my own scheduling problems, but I am planning to stream this Sunday 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, and bring back some streams again. So I shouldn't have any more problems that I know of going forward. So it should be fine. And also finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So, if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But, regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!